Hello and welcome to the Uprising Show. And today I have a very inspirational, incredible person with me here, Marly Brodsky. Marly, welcome to the show. And I would like you to take a minute to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. I am so excited to be here with you. As you mentioned, I am Marly Brodsky, and I am the founder and CEO of this amazing company called MedCompanion, where we provide virtual medical companions to patients during their doctor's appointments and beyond. So essentially, it's like having a little healthcare sidekick in your pocket. And we do this all through leveraging technology and, of course, providing that human touch. So I've been in healthcare for over 15 years now, and I started as a public health major and then worked with the largest medical scribe company where I helped develop and create the medical scribe introduction to outpatient clinics and then helped grow that division. So that's been my journey at a glance, but this is where I am today.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Before we go into Med Companion, I want to go a little back in your life. And, I did hear the few podcasts you were on, and it's an incredible story. So I want to start and go back from your childhood. So, what I learned was that you and your family ended up in the US from Panama and in a very unusual circumstances. So, your dad was a fisherman in Panama and he had an accident. So, for his treatment, you all moved to the US when you were one. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So my dad, ever since he was 15, was working as a tuna fisherman. And he met my mom at a very young age, had a very terrible accident that required over 27 surgeries. And the only place that could do that type of procedure was California in the States there. So he came, he was hospitalized there, and then ultimately asked to have my mom and I come, and I was still a baby. So I grew up mostly in San Diego, California.
And after that, once you go through, serious medical condition, especially for your dad, how was it afterwards? Was he able to work, or was it partially able to work?
Yeah, he was obviously on disability for a while he recovered from all the surgeries that he had. And once he was cleared to work, he decided to start his own business. So he had a landscape company. So he gave up fishing, obviously, but he started his own landscape company with my mom out of his little Honda and ultimately built it from the ground up. So he created a really good company for himself, and that is how he provided for myself and ultimately my siblings that came after me for a while. And for a while, life seemed pretty good.
And then I also heard that then things turned not so good, and at the age of 12, you were homeless. What happened there?
That is correct. So I would say, like any risk in business, sometimes trusting the wrong partner can lead to a difficult turning point. And at that time, my dad was trying to grow his business, scale his business, and due to a bad partnership transaction, um, it ended up costing us our home and everything that we owned. So at the age of 12, I had two other siblings at the time that were younger. And one night we just saw the sheriff come. They gave us an hour to pack whatever we could, and then they locked our home. And that was the last time I saw a home for several years.
Wow. And is tell us about a little bit in that juncture of life, because you're already teen, and and you're entering and you have a big family. And then how are you feeling, and how did you find the strength to keep going forward? Also, on behalf of your family, I guess, how everyone else was feeling, how did you get together as a group and decide to move on with life?
Honestly, I have to say that primarily just faith and God. We grew up Christian. We've always had a very strong spiritual and faith background. And it's something that since we were little, my dad always talked about. It was just like that faith, reading the Bible and knowing that God sometimes has a better plan. And it's really hard to trust that process. And of course, we're still human. So at that time, everybody was angry. I think we were shocked, like, wait, what just happened? Like, I don't have a house, right? When you're a kid, you're like, what in the world just happened? Um, and, you see your parents arguing because now life is difficult. And, my mom was just as shocked at the situation. But my dad just never really lost his faith. He's like, we're going to get through this. It might not be easy, but we're going to get through it. We have to stay together. We're going to pray. We're going to do whatever we can. He's like, I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep finding a way to provide. And even though it was difficult, we just stayed together and didn't let our faith flutter.
And when you started to go to school, or when you were going to school at that time, did you feel like you will be able to make it to the college, or did it seem like too far? What was going on in your mind regarding college?
Yeah, in all honesty, like college just wasn't something that my family really talked about. It was something that I knew of. And when you grow up being a minority and being in a situation like the one we were, it was like you got good grades because it's the right thing to do, not because you're trying to go to college or anything like that. Um, and it was just one of those things where we didn't tell people at school what we were going through because we didn't want to be separated from our family. We got good grades because that was the right thing to do. We sometimes slept in our car. Sometimes we slept in a hotel or a motel, a very dangerous motel. And sometimes we would go to like random parks that had like showers and like toilets and things available where we could just, rinse and go about our life. And that was for a while, but ultimately, um, when it came to school, like our parents always told us, like, get good grades, but we don't have the money for you to go to college. So it was not anything that I thought about. And I was very naive. Like I knew that I wanted to be a doctor from very early on. I loved helping people. I loved healthcare, but I just didn't know what the process was like. So I always assumed that if I just got good grades, I could just show up to a hospital and apply to be a doctor and somebody was going to train me. That was my thought process. And clearly I was wrong.
Yeah, yeah, and I also heard on that podcast where you were on that there was this teacher whom you mentioned you met in the school, who showed you that he or she explained you that you will go to the college, put that confidence in you, and made you believe that you can do this anything that you want to do. Could you share who this teacher was and how they helped you, how he or she helped you?
Yeah, I mean, this teacher, I often feel like she was an angel that was just placed in my life. But her name was Jamie Fitzgerald. She has since passed. She passed in 2016 from cancer. But ultimately, I remember being in high school, and a lot of my friends were taking this class called AVID at that time, which was a class that helped students go through the process of college application and preparing them and things like that. I didn't take it because to me, I was not going to go to college. I couldn't afford it. And I remember a lot of my friends would go to this class and I would just sit and wait outside for my friends. And eventually she came out of the class one day and she saw me there every day, like just sitting outside. She's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I'm waiting for my friends. And she's like, why are you not in there? I said, oh, because I'm not going to college. She's like, oh, you don't want to pursue higher education? I was like, I can't afford it. And then she asked me, like, well, what do you want to be? I said, oh, I want to be a doctor. She's like, wait, so you want to be a doctor, but you don't want to go to college? How are you going to do that? I said, that's so easy. I have a plan. I'm going to graduate. And then once I graduate, I'm going to go to the hospital and apply. And I'm going to become a doctor. So she looked at me. She didn't laugh, which was surprising because when I think about it, I'm like, I would have laughed at myself. And she kind of hugged me and she's like, oh, sweetheart, that's not how it works. Um, if you want to be a doctor, you have to go to college and then you have to go to medical school. And then there's a whole process after that. So I remember sitting there feeling like my whole life just once again was crushed. Like, there's no way I am going to go to college. Like, I'm not going to become a doctor because I can't go to college. And she said, go talk to your counselors. I want you to enroll in my class and I'm going to help you go to college. And I was like, I can't. I don't have the money. My parents don't have the money. And I kept telling her, and she was like, money should never be the reason you do not pursue your dreams. And that just kind of stuck with me. And sure enough, like, she helped me go to college. I got into college with a full ride. And then afterward, I helped my brother get into college as well with a lot of scholarships. I helped my sister get to college with a lot of scholarships. So it just became this thing where it was like, we do go to college. We can go to college. And she made me believe, and she made me believe that I could, and she taught me how, and I did.
Wonderful. Um, you know, in your journeys, in our journeys in life, I believe that looking back, when you look, a lot of things connect, and looking back, you also see why certain people, how they were in your life, how they came in your life, and it's unbelievable that all of that makes sense looking back,
Yeah,
right? Right?
yeah,
It's like you're like, this was a plan that somebody wrote.
yeah.
So this is how life works, and this is why they say, right, like believe in doing your own work or karma. Things will happen for the reason. Focus on the karma rather than focus on the result, and that's
Oh,
kind of what
absolutely. Yeah,
we all try to live through that lens, and then things happen, right? So I really, I guess you should take a moment to give shout out to this teacher who actually came in your life, and also, hopefully rest in peace, but also uh, put you to this right path or helped you navigate that at that moment.
yeah,
So you
absolutely.
got
And I think about her all the time because her entire career was focused on helping students get to college, and she helped thousands of students at the time. And right before she passed, I had the opportunity to talk to her. A week before she passed, we talked on the phone, and all she said was like, "I'm so proud of you. You're going to do great things." And then a week later, she passed, unfortunately, and wouldn't you know it, 3 years later, I go and I get my master's, which was also, I never thought I could get a master's, right? So it was incredible what one teacher did for my life.
And then afterwards, you ended up going to college. You are in the college, and then again, life took a little U-turn on you.
Yeah.
And then one morning, when you were 18, October 6th, 2006, you were diagnosed with brain tumor. Obviously, anybody would be devastated, and I think they told you that you would have to drop out, or you, because of your condition, but you told everyone that, no, I'm going to go ahead with my life. I won't drop out, and I would rather die trying. um, how Tell me a little bit about that. It's a setback, but tell me about what's your mind, what how did you come to that conclusion that, this is what I want to do, I will go ahead with it? What was that made you feel like this is what I have to do it, even if, whatever it takes?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of felt like at that moment, it just felt like life was so unfair. Like, geez, God, I finally get to college, which was not even something that I thought was possible. I'm 6 weeks into college. I start to feel really sick. I wake up one morning, can't feel half my body, end up in the hospital, and I just knew something was wrong. I didn't know how bad it was until I saw the doctor come and talk to my parents and then talk to me. And I just remember thinking, like, I know that God didn't bring me this far just to bring me this far. Like, there has to be more. There has to be more. And I worked so hard for that scholarship. Withdrawing at that time would mean that I would withdraw my scholarship. And the likelihood that I could even get that back or have the same opportunity was somehow like seemed a lot harder than just going through a brain tumor at that time, is kind of what it felt like. And I just thought about my scenario. I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm just going to go home and wake up every day and see if I survive or if I'm not going to survive. And I'm just going to go crazy thinking about the fact that I have a brain tumor. And I just remember saying, like, well, you know what? At least if something happens and if I die from this brain tumor, I can at least say that I went to college and I'm going to make the most out of what I have. And I got a scholarship. I'm not going to give that up, and we'll see what happens.
Wow. And afterwards, how was the recovery? How long did it take? And I know you wanted to become a doctor, so what happened to that afterwards?
Yeah, so spoiler alert, I did not become a doctor. But I would say, like, it was a really rough, the first 2 years was really hard. And I think anybody looking at my transcript could see, like, where the dips, like where my health was at any given time. But it was very difficult. I became the girl that would go to class and sometimes would faint. I would be taken out in an ambulance. The paramedics were always showing up because I was always fainting in class. I was very weak. I was often in a lot of pain. I had a lot of migraines. So I wasn't feeling 100%. I missed a lot of class. So anytime I took a class that relied on participation as part of their grading scale, I'm like, well, I'm screwed because I don't always make it to class. But ultimately, I just kept going. I figured I would try. I figured that I had to give it whatever best I could in that day. And I remember it was very frustrating. I went into depression because I was so upset. I was so sick. And it was actually like my family and my dad's words that got me through it, because my dad saw how much I was struggling. And he said, honey, pain is always going to be inevitable, but being miserable is your choice. So those words just kind of stuck with me. And I was like, he's right. I can wake up every day and be miserable and be this like ungrateful person and not like my life and not take advantage of the opportunities. Or I can wake up every day and try to give it whatever percent I have of me that day, but at least I gave it what I had. And that's exactly what I did.
And I know because of your grades, you couldn't make it to the med school. You applied to 20 schools, and none of the school you made it to. But then, what did you do next after that? What was like? Okay, I can't become a doctor. You might. I'm sure you are shattered again because this is what you wanted to do for life. Then what's like? How did you pick yourself up? And then who guided you to the next step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I ended up graduating with a 2.7, which is really low. For me, having been a straight A student and suddenly graduate with a 2.7 was shattering. And it's ironic, but actually, July 26th of 2011 was when I got my last rejection letter. So that was just last week. I was just reflecting on that. But that's essentially when I got my last rejection letter from medical school 13 years ago. And I remember sitting crying in my tiny little apartment. I called my dad. I was like, my life is over. I felt like I had hit rock bottom, and everything I had worked for just completely shattered. And I had nothing else. I never prepared for anything else. And I remember once again my dad being like, sometimes God doesn't give you certain things because he has better things for you. And I was like, okay, dad, you're supposed to say that. You're my dad. You're trying to make me feel better. Like, whatever. Um, And that happened. And at the time, I was already working as a medical scribe for a hospital. And I talked to the COO of that company and I said, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do because I didn't get into medical school. And yeah, I was like, I probably will be working full time. And she was like, how would you like to travel the country and implement medical scribe programs for a year? And I said, oh, I never thought about leaving California because that's all I knew. Um, the being 22 years old, the thought of like traveling the country alone was terrifying. But looking at my alternative, I'm like, well, I don't really have a choice. Everything I set for myself kind of fell apart. So I took the opportunity. I said I would love to. And I became a traveling project manager. I traveled for several years in that company. I lived in like 38 different states. I worked with thousands of doctors during that time. And then ultimately, in one of my first assignments, I had the opportunity to pioneer medical scribes in outpatient clinics. And that was the first time anyone had successfully done that in the industry. So I ended up creating the education behind that, which became the standard for medical scribe training, and then taking an entire industry from something that hadn't happened to growing that to over like 3,000 clinics, and training over 15,000 medical scribes at the time. So I enjoyed what I did, so I stayed there for 14 years. I climbed the ladder. I had a pretty nice executive role there, and I was pretty comfortable. I was making a living that I didn't think I could ever reach. I had achieved a lot of success, and I stayed there for 14 years.
Wow. Did you ever feel like the impact just got bigger from there because you wanted to be a doctor, and now here you are working with the doctors and so many, and then your impact is almost multiplied to, I don't know, X. And how did you feel about that?
I had a moment where I was sitting one day at a really distinguished hospital and I was sitting in their boardroom with their CEO, several doctors, and we're talking about the strategy and I'm proposing all these different things. And when I walked out of there, I remember coming home and telling my husband, I'm like, it's so weird that I am now helping all the doctors and helping these universities that like several years ago rejected me, and told me I wasn't good enough to be a doctor, but I'm suddenly good enough to be sitting in their boardroom and providing the strategies to increase quality of care.
Full circle. um, all right, so fast forward to your entrepreneurial phase. So what made you take the leap of faith into building your own business after that, after now that you've done 15 years of climbing the ladder in the corporate world? What's next? And then one day you decide, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. What was that? How that happened?
I wish it was that simple. I I reached a point where I was really burnt out in my career. I had worked so hard, and then I was a mom of two, and at that time I was getting my master's at the same time. And then my daughter's health started to spiral, and she was going through a lot of different conditions, and it just required my full attention. And as that was happening, shortly after, my grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I got to see her struggle through a cancer diagnosis. I got to see how difficult it was for people to navigate the healthcare system. And then I also got to see her pass very quickly, and unexpectedly. So it was really that pain that triggered my desire to change it. Um, I don't think I ever thought that I was going to own a business or run a business. That was never something that I woke up. I was like, I'm going to start a business. It was more something that evolved out of the pain. And every time I thought about my grandmother and I thought about the 14 years I had been in healthcare and I thought about all those patients that had been in those similar situations and continue to be in those situations, I felt like I had to do something about it. Um, and I remember like one night I was crying and I was still grieving. I was in so much pain. I was angry that my grandmother passed so quickly and had such a traumatic passing. And I woke up, it was like 2 in the morning. And I woke up my husband, who was not very happy with me because I woke him up at 2 in the morning. And I grabbed the first thing I had, and I think it was like a water bill or something. And I grabbed that and I was like, I'm going to change healthcare. I know how I'm going to change healthcare. And I was really excited. And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I haven't found anything that is there for patients the way that I think people should be there for patients. And I want everybody to have the ability to have a companion, to have somebody there, to have an advocate, to have the support and help families so that they understand what's going on. And he was like, okay. And I just started writing everything down, like everything that came to my mind. I started writing it down. And then, of course, he was looking at me because he saw how excited I was, and he was like, "Okay." And he's fueling, and he's fueling me, and he's giving me ideas. And this is like 2 in the morning, so um, I go to sleep, and then I wake up the next morning, and I'm like, "What am I thinking? I can't do this. Like, I'm not going to do this. No." So it sat there for a little bit, but every day I would look at that paper, and I was in one of my business classes, and there was a discussion post that the professor put up. And coincidentally, it was something along the lines of, if you could start a business and you knew that you could not fail and you knew that money was no objection, what would you do? And I wrote everything that I had written on that piece of paper at 2 in the morning. And I was just like more inspired, and like more ideas started to come, and I left it at that. And then eventually I got an email from one of my professors asking to schedule a meeting to talk to me. So I'm like, oh man, what did I do? And he scheduled a meeting, and he was like, I read your post and I read everything that you've done. And he was like, is this a real business? And I said, oh no, this is something that I've thought about, but it's not a real business. Maybe one day, I don't know. And he's like, well, what's holding you back? I'm like, I don't know. I've never started a business. Like, I have 2 kids. I just left my corporate job. Like, this is not something that I planned for. And he's like, well, I can tell that you're very passionate about it. I could tell that healthcare needs this right now. And I feel that if you don't pursue this, someone else might try to do it and they may not be as compassionate as you are. And he was like, I think you should do it. And I'm like, I don't know. And I still sat with it for like another week. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to register the business. I'm going to do that. I'm going to register the business. I registered the business. I was like, okay, well, now I have a business. And everything just kind of took me a little bit to get comfortable with the idea of, I'm really going to do this. I'm going to go back into the healthcare industry and become a disruptor in what is known to be healthcare right now and create something new and different, which is not going to be easy. So I was mentally preparing for that.
Do you have any co-founders with you on this one, or all you're doing all by yourself?
I had a few employees that I brought on, and I did have early co-founders that left very early. So it's primarily just me.
Okay, so for and this is Med Companion we are
Yeah,
talking about,
correct.
and just for everyone who's listening this, so um, it's the funny thing is, we had an incident. Me and my wife, we were sitting last year, and she's a nurse. She had a whole career as a nurse, and now she's of course, They're two babies right now at home. So, but she got burnt out, and she was like critical care, and then she worked at Columbia. Then we met in New York, and so here's a long career of this. But also, she got burnt out after that, and but the thing is, we have a friends, very close friends of ours, who's in California, and their daughter had different conditions going on, and she was trying to navigate them over the phone all the time, telling them this, like, hey, you need to ask for these questions, you need to ask for this help, this is how you need to specifically ask questions to the nurse or to the doctor, and that's
Mhm.
how you have to do it. To that level, it turned out that she was on those calls whenever they were in the clinic there.
Yeah.
And we were literally, after that call, I was like, this is like, everybody needs that. Like, we were talking this, and literally we were like, one of the things, when I read about, as soon as I read the name, I just knew it, like, this has to be with this kind of idea. And then I was like immediately thinking about that, like what happened to us last year with this conversation. And then, we had our troubles too with health problems this last few months, and thank God we are out of that. But similar things were that, like, we needed, how do we get this help? So for me,
Yeah.
this idea is very real. So how is it? Is there anyone else doing it in the industry, or are you the only one doing it? And like, where does it exist, the landscape of this?
Yeah. So there are a lot there are a lot of care navigation programs out there, and there's a lot of patient navigation programs out there. And most of those support patients like before they go to the doctor or after they go to the doctor. What my goal was, and after being a medical scribe, what I realized, I'm like, that's helpful, but the way that you help patients before or after is only as good as the information you get during the visit. And nobody was capturing that. So when I started doing research, unless you had a friend or a caregiver that was going with you to the doctor, nobody else was providing that type of support during the medical visits. And my goal was, how can I create something that brings that support, that level of support, and interacts with the doctor, interacts with the patient, and ultimately bridges all of the communication with a caregiver, with a family member, right? Because, and I hear these stories all the time. Like, my parents are in Florida and I'm in California. My dad has a heart condition and he goes to the doctor, and I talk to him and he says everything's fine, but then he has to go back and do this. He's like, I have no idea what's going on, right? So that's ultimately where we come in. It's like, obviously things are not fine, and there's a lot that goes on in that medical visit with your doctor that requires somebody that's paying attention, that's helping you ask the right questions, and also conveying that information to your family members if you choose that type of support. And that is where we come in. We make sure that we're in the room with the patient virtually, we're taking notes, we're asking questions. We always talk to them beforehand. Sometimes we talk to their family members if they want them involved in their healthcare. So we get all of the information from all the different angles, and we make sure that everybody is talking to each other. So if they go see their primary care and then they go to their cardiologist, we make sure that the primary care doctor knows what's going on with the cardiologist, and that everybody is communicating with each other.
Wonderful. So how does it exactly work? So, like, if is it, you patients come to you directly, or is it like you go into hospitals and practices, and you tell them to use you? And is there any tech involved from your side?
Yeah. So ultimately, when we first started 3 years ago, it was direct to consumer. So it's patients or family members that wanted the support for a loved one or for themselves. They would go on our website and book directly with us. They would sign up for our membership, and then we would work with them throughout the month for however long they booked us. Um, and that's ultimately how we started. We still have a lot of patients that come to us and they book our service to work directly with us. However, in the last 6 months, with all of the new value-based care program initiatives that Medicare has launched, our model has shifted more towards working directly with the doctors who want to enhance the patient experience and support for their patients. And we partner with the doctors so that we can then work with their patients and help them navigate that. So one of our biggest clients right now, it's an ophthalmology clinic, and we help all of their patients who are currently on Medicare navigate the system, and we help them through their glaucoma journey. Or if they're about to have cataract surgery, we do a lot of the pre-op communication. So whatever the doctor's telling them, we are emphasizing that information. We're simplifying that information. We're available to answer any questions. If there's something that requires a little bit more from the doctor, then we can bridge that type of gap as well. And that way, it's also helping doctors not spend time on care coordination. So one of the things that we hear from doctors all the time is, I spend about 80% of my time just on care coordination
Right.
because it does require so many moving pieces in order to help the patient navigate and have the health outcome that they need.
Two follow-up questions to this. One is, are you, for this model, value-based care model, are you now partnering with health plans directly, or is it just like, you're getting credentialed with them somehow and then you're working with the provider? How exactly is it working
Yeah,
right now?
so right now we're primarily working with the providers. So we're considered more as like their clinical support team, and that is how we work with them. And then they're able to bill their insurance company accordingly. However, what we're working towards is working directly with those insurance companies, so that this is something that can become more of a standard care of practice for patients.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's, if that happens, that is like, that should happen actually, because then that's when the true value-based care kicks in, and
100%.
payers have the most, when they can offer to all their members, and then it changes a lot of stuff for not only your business but overall just the care model itself, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, that's great. And other question I had was like, is it all virtual support to the patients, or is it also in person with going with someone? How does it work on that
Yeah.
level?
So right now it's all virtual support. So it's
Okay.
all virtual. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for
Mhm.
everyone. And also virtually allows us to reach more people.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
we're able to do that.
there are similar models already in place in different ways, right? Like, for
Right.
example, language translation is a big one, which
Exactly. That's kind of what
be
we
like
thought
this,
about. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and I mean, in with our home care clients, we were using that line, like whenever we go to, with the caregiver and they don't speak the
Yeah.
language, then we turn on the phone line and have the translator on the line, right?
Right.
So, okay, very
And
interesting.
you bring up a really good point, because ultimately that's the way that I thought about it when I was first building MedCompanion was, well, to a certain extent, we are a translator. We are helping translate what the doctor is saying into simpler terms for patients to understand and for their families to understand. So,
Yeah, I
um,
mean, you are, in my mind, you're like translator multiplied by 100x value, right? Because translation is there just word to word, but here it's like navigating and understanding and making sure people understanding in the way they should understand. I'm sure it also touches to the component of making sure what questions to be clarified also, right? Just having
yeah,
that guidance, right? So,
yes,
I almost feel like translation companies should be in trouble with a company like you. Like, they should be like, this is how it should be. Like, this is what it should be, right? Like, that's how I am viewing this, right? So, this is in my mind is far more valuable, right? So
right.
that's how I'm looking at it. But
And,
it's a good proof point that there is already an existing model, and now
yeah,
you're doing so. It becomes like, it's not an unknown thing in the industry, and that
correct.
makes it like, okay, we can take this path to implement this business model. So that's the
Yeah, and
exciting.
when I looked at things, that was essentially what came to mind, was like, well, there's so many virtual health translators out there already. We're essentially just translating medical jargon into
Yeah.
plain terms, layman's terms, and
Oh my God.
just
My,
taking
my,
it the
my
next step.
marketing mind is also, I live my life on the intersection of tech, healthcare, and marketing. So I'm like, this is what human to human interaction, right? Like that's what it is. Like that's
Yes,
what you are. You are going to translate that into human to human, and that's what it is,
100%.
right? So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, makes me excited a lot because there's so much good, the value in this is okay. Great. So now, talking about the business slightly more, uh, I guess a couple of questions here. So do you have customers and how you have gotten them? I know you have made this, and you're obviously making this transition, which is very obvious. I've worked with several businesses where which starts at patient side, and then they go towards become B to B to C, and that's
yeah,
kind of what you're going to. And the reason for that is actually you will be surprised that it's how our health system is set up. Most people are covered through insurance. Our health system runs on insurance.
yeah,
So eventually we don't have choice to just directly selling subscriptions or memberships upfront, because most of the people are going to go insurance route. So that's how
right,
we increase access, right? Like that's
yeah,
how it works. So it's not even a surprise to me that you're deviating towards this model now,
yeah,
towards like this, going to providers directly or going to payers directly, right?
correct, yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how far are you with the providers and payers, and generally, uh, how are you getting to them? How are you acquiring them? So I guess these two questions.
Yeah, so I would say that an advantage of having worked in healthcare for so long and working with so many different doctors is that I have a really great network to pull from. So I've reconnected with a lot of doctors. Ultimately, we do have doctors that find us on LinkedIn. Surprisingly, that's been like our number one way to get some of these leads has been on LinkedIn. And really nurturing those relationships. And most of the time is, a doctor is looking for a solution. They're burnt out. They're spending all this time. Like, imagine everything I just said. And that is essentially what doctors are doing for a lot of their patients in today's healthcare
Yeah,
landscape. So the fact that we can take that burden and really allow patients to focus on their care and what they do best, instead of like trying to make sure that Sally Smith gets into her echo cardiogram and all this bunch of stuff, is an advantage. So we work a lot with like leveraging the network that I already have, and then that one of my partners already has too, but also just marketing to providers and individuals. I do a lot of networking. Um, I have done a lot of podcasts, and we've also had a lot of media attention. So we've been published in several different articles, and we're about to be on TV pretty soon here too. So it's just about spreading the word, and finding those right people. I would say our biggest traction right now is working with providers and the clinics. Our next step and our next focus is really just trying to push into that payer market.
and while you're recruiting the people on your people who are available for these calls, are they all clinicians there, or is it like a mix of clinicians and non-clinicians there?
So it's a mix. So we have a mix of certified medical assistants. We have registered nurses also working on our team. And we also have either public health majors or health educators. So I myself am a board certified health educator. So I do a lot of the education, and I've developed a lot of the training protocols for our teams, that allows them to be better educators as well.
Makes sense. And so what are your biggest challenges at the moment? And also the CEO of the company. So where do you stand?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest challenge is with bringing anything new to the market. It's always hard when you're the first one. And it's always hard to get those early adapters. I think that we've done a really good job with the beta program itself, and then with some of our early adopters in the clinician side of things. But it's just awareness and marketing right now is our biggest challenge.
Got it. And um, I guess the question is, based on this, are you planning to do a fundraise and then go, VC companies once you get money and then go for it? Is that the feeling you have, or you feel like no, I still want to grow to a certain level and then reassess where you are? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think that right now we've been very fortunate to have been able to bootstrap our company and get a few private investors, which has allowed us to continue to grow. It really just depends on where the company's needs are. So I think right now, with all of the organic growth that we have, we're able to maintain that and scale from there. But things could change. I can wake up any day. I think my biggest fear is like waking up one day and not being able to sustain the demand. And if that were the case, then I think at that point we would be looking at more funding and capital for scalability.
Okay. I mean, so really, keep it as is and keep growing. And if you feel like now you need growth capital, then you go and find ways. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Great. All right. So, little long term view. Where do you see MedCompanion in 5 years, and what's like? How do you feel will be the long term goals for the company?
Yeah, so I think about that question a lot. So I think in 5 years, I foresee MedCompanion being a household name where people just know what a MedCompanion is. I think right now there's nobody searching like I need a MedCompanion, right? They don't really know much about it unless they've heard it on a podcast or they've read some of the articles. But ultimately, I do foresee MedCompanion being a household name and becoming more of a standard of healthcare, where payers can offer this to all of their patients, and help them improve their health outcomes. So that is my goal, is that in 5 years, there will be more programs that allow us to better serve the people in the communities and bring those together. Uh, and ultimately, I think that there's a lot of different opportunities where MedCompanion can go. There's other ways that we can leverage MedCompanion. Right now, our biggest focus has been primarily in those clinics, especially in primary care, ophthalmology, and oncology, because those are the patients that are normally um, the ones that have the most chronic conditions and need the most support. But our goal is ultimately to expand into the emergency department, as you mentioned, like, being that translator for somebody who's probably going through a big emergency problem or has family somewhere else and they're in the emergency room and probably feeling lost and scared. Being able to provide something that's more on call for patients to utilize, I think would be ideal.
Yeah. It's like like when anybody, patients in general, as a patient, I'm looking for support when I need the most is when things are urgent or there is emergency, right?
Right.
So it feels very natural that I almost feel like there is this part of course, translating the information and so that people can understand layman language, and then the second part is of feeling that I can have that support
Mhm.
anytime. And if I can just reach out to someone, that's like, to me, it's like no brainer service. Like, it's like, feels like, yeah, I should be using it. Right.
Yeah.
And if on your, it seems like things have been figured out on the payment side, it's not really like an out of pocket expense for the provider, and it's really baked into the care and care coordination piece in
Right.
general for them to bill with and reimburse with the payers.
Right.
Then it's again no brainer, right? So it's
Right.
like, again, makes it like it's like more now, how do we get this implementation done, right? Like, let's get you started, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of implementation on the provider side, how long does it take for you to like, okay, let's get you started? How long does it take? Is it pretty quick, or do you have to do something?
It really just depends on the provider. So a lot of providers tend to be more particular about their patients, and obviously, security and safety is at the forefront of everything that we do. So we normally do slower ramp ups with doctors, especially now as we're still pretty new in that arena. But I would say it normally takes anywhere between 6 to 10 weeks to start getting like patients enrolled, start getting the messaging out there, and truly start working with those patients. It's more like, okay, they normally work very closely with us. So the doctors and the administrators of the health system work very closely with us to say, like, here is a list of the patients we think can benefit the most here. And it's also important that, at least for right now, the time being, that they're also like Medicare patients, because those are the
Mhm.
payers that are currently paying for those service. Um, so we work very closely with that, and then we prioritize like which of these patients do you feel needs it more urgently, or which diagnosis benefits the most. So when we were working with oncology or with ophthalmology, a lot of those were like, okay, well, we see a lot of issues with our glaucoma patients. They are not very compliant. They don't take their drops accordingly. They don't do this. They don't do that. So that's where we've been able to step in and help. Um, when we were working with oncology, it was more like, okay, let's focus on those patients that are just newly diagnosed to make sure that there isn't a lapse of time from diagnosis to treatment. So that's kind of where we've been focused when it comes to
That's
oncology.
that's really interesting in a way. Like even though you are doing the information exchange in more human language to understand, but this is a specific case of treatment adherence or medication adherence, right?
Absolutely.
And then it's and I have seen some companies in this space just medication adherence separately doing it,
That's huge. Yeah.
but it's really interesting that of course if you are doing this you will be involved in now also making sure those things are happening,
Yeah.
and then it takes the scope more than just like not just the question and answer, but it goes beyond it, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of why it is super important, and then it's easy to show value also because then it's really value based after that. Like you can really tap onto those matrices and show them. Wow, okay,
Yeah, I
good.
mean, our goal is to essentially be like a full turnkey solution for care coordination from start to finish. And our goal is to see those patient outcomes. And it's really, I would say, for me as the CEO, it's really nice for me to see those stories of patients being like, I worked with MedCompanion, and because of that, I knew exactly what my diagnosis was. I never missed an appointment. I was able to take my medications on time, and I go to my doctor's office, and even though I have cancer, I'm still really happy because I know everything that's going on with my health. And we get that from the doctor's side as well. They're like, I can tell the difference between patients who have med companions and patients who do not, because their level of engagement is also different. And it all starts with just that communication, that translation. When patients understand, they will engage, and that is what we're trying to do.
This is, I tell you, this is, you're going to do so well. I'm just waiting for this thing to blow up. this
Thank you.
is, this is like, at so many level, it's much needed. And so many level, it's just like, it's just making the whole care coordination uh, much more effective, medication adherence better, treatment adherence better, outcomes better. So if it checks so many things, so so yeah. Oh, okay, this is great, fantastic. Well, this has been great, Marley. I really appreciate it, and great conversation, great insights into the company that you're building. Um, I conclude this show by asking a fun question, which is actually um, my favorite go-to question. If you hear all the podcasts of whatever we have done, is I ask my guest, and this is for you, that if you would like to share one thing that no one in your professional circles know about it, but this is your time or this is your shot to tell it. What is that thing? It could be anything, could be related to you, it could be related to your business, but whatever. That's one thing that no one knows, but you are, of course, like to share. This is your chance, this is your stage.
I do have one thing that I've never shared publicly. Like, unless you're my family or a close friend, you probably didn't know this about me. But growing up, I wanted to be a doctor so badly, but I couldn't walk into a hospital without fainting. So I would walk into the hospital and you could almost count to 10 and I was on the floor. Like, I would faint every single time I would walk into a hospital. And a lot of people would laugh because they're like, how are you going to be a doctor if you're constantly fainting? And that was something that I had to work through. And when I became a freshman in high school, I started to work through that by volunteering at a hospital. So I went and I volunteered. I asked the volunteer manager if she could interview me outside because if I went into the hospital, I was going to faint. So she thought it was so crazy that I was going to volunteer at the hospital because she's like, how are you going to get past the front doors? I'm like, well, that's what I'm about to figure out. And for the first month, I would have my mom drop me off and wait in the parking lot because it was almost guaranteed that I was going to faint within the first minute. So I would walk in, I would faint, my mom would come get me, and then I would try again. And every day, like, I made it further and further into the hospital until about a year, I was finally able to stay and work 8 hours in the hospital as a volunteer, and I did not faint. And that became how I got over, I don't know if it was my fear of hospitals or the smell of hospitals. I don't know. But if you ask anyone in my family or close friends, they'll say, like, how she did it, I don't know, because I could not go into a hospital without fainting for the longest time. And yet I still worked in healthcare. I worked in high trauma centers when I was a medical scribe. I was in the operating rooms with the doctors doing their medical records. And I got to see a lot of things that if I hadn't worked through that limitation, I probably would have never been able to do.
Wow. You didn't see that odds were stacking against you to become a doctor?
I mean, I
This is
did.
what's
I
happening.
did. But I feel like when you're really passionate, when you really want something in life, you look for ways to overcome whatever obstacle
Which you
that
did. In all honesty, you
and
did. You
that
ended
was
up doing.
something that even the volunteer manager was like, I still can't believe that you you did this because it took a while for me to be able to volunteer and get past that front door for a long time. So yeah, that was a big limitation. And I know that, like, I got made fun of a lot and my parents used to laugh at me and they're like, who wants a doctor that's going to show up and faint? Like, you can't do that. So that was something that I've never shared publicly, but I used to be like a chronic fainter. The moment those hospital doors open, I would be on the floor.
All right. Thanks for sharing it. Again, thanks for your time. How can people find you if they want to reach out to you, hit you up? Where should they get to you?
Yeah, if people are interested in MedCompanion, the best way is to go to our website, medcompanion.com, or they can follow any of our social media platforms, just MedCompanion, on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I would love to see some people there, be able to answer questions. I do a lot of lives on there too, where I bring in other guests that are in healthcare working on similar things or just have a lot of experience. So I think that we can still provide a lot of value.
All right, everybody, medcompanion.com. That's the website. And you can check on their social media from there. This has been great. Thank you so much for your time, Marley, and thank you for sharing all your life journey and your journey of starting the company. I'm very gung ho about this company. Let me tell you this. I've been probably this is episode 10 for us, and this is the number one for me right now. Business
Oh,
model.
thank you.
This is great. So thank you. Appreciate it.